To fully comprehend the magnitude of the catastrophe unfolding in Transnistria, we must first dissect the unique and bizarre economic engine that has kept this unrecognized state on life support for 3 decades. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, the separatist region has existed in a suspended state of reality, fueled entirely by a geopolitical anomaly: the supply of free natural gas from the Russian Federation. For 30 years, Gazprom has pumped billions of cubic meters of gas through Ukrainian pipelines into the Transnistrian segment. Yet the bill for this energy, now accumulating to a staggering debt of nearly $10 billion, was deliberately charged to the central government of Moldova and Chisinau, knowing full well they would never pay it. This scheme was not accidental. It was a calculated strategy by Moscow to subsidize the separatist regime without direct cash transfers, allowing Tiraspol to maintain artificially low utility costs for its population and, crucially, to power the massive Soviet-era Kusiagin power station. This power plant, fueled by free Russian gas, generated cheap electricity that was sold back to Moldova, providing the hard currency needed to prop up the separatist government. However, the timeline for this economic miracle expired on January 1, 2025. With the definitive end of the gas transit agreement between Ukraine and Russia, the physical infrastructure that delivered this lifeline has been severed. Ukraine, now in a total war for survival, has refused to renew the transit deal, effectively turning off the tap. The consequences for Tiraspol are immediate and apocalyptic. Without this gas, the Kusiagin plant cannot function at capacity, meaning the regime loses its primary source of revenue and its ability to provide heat and power to its citizens during the freezing winter months. The leadership in Tiraspol is now trapped in a geographical prison. They're landlocked between a hostile Ukraine and a pro-European Moldova, with no friendly borders, no seaports, and no functioning airport. The gray zone economy, which thrived on smuggling and energy subsidies, is crashing into the hard reality of a blockade. This is not merely a supply chain issue. It is the total dismantling of the region's social contract. The people of Transnistria, who were promised protection and prosperity by the Russian world, are waking up to a reality where the Kremlin is physically unable to send help. The gas crisis has stripped away the illusion of independence, revealing Transnistria, or what it truly is, a dependency that can no longer be fed. While Western media often portrays Transnistria as a rigid communist dictatorship filled with Soviet nostalgia, the operational reality is that the region is actually a hyper-capitalist monopoly run by a single corporate entity known as Sheriff. To understand the political direction of the region, you must ignore the politicians and follow the money. Founded in the chaos of the early 1990s by two former KGB officers, Viktor Gushin and Ilya Kazmily, Sheriff has grown from a small trading firm into a monolithic holding company that devours roughly 60% of the legal economy. They control everything: the supermarket chains, the petrol stations, the sole mobile network provider, the television station, the bread factories, the spirits distillery Kvint, and even the famous football club that competes in the Champions League. For decades, the arrangement between Sheriff and Moscow was symbiotic. Russia provided the security umbrella, and Sheriff managed the local administration. However, the invasion of Ukraine in 2022 fundamentally shattered this alignment. The owners of Sheriff are not ideological crusaders. They are pragmatic oligarchs whose primary motivation is profit preservation. They witnessed the devastation of the Donbas and realized that being tethered to the Russian economy, now the most sanctioned on earth, was a death sentence for their business empire. Consequently, a silent pivot has occurred. Statistical data reveals that today, over 70% of Transnistria's exports are destined for the European Union, utilizing the trade privileges granted by Moldova's deep and comprehensive Free Trade Area DCFTA agreement. The steel produced in Rabnica and the textiles manufactured in Tiraspol are sold to buyers in Germany, Romania, and Italy, not Russia. The oligarchs know that their survival depends entirely on maintaining access to Western markets and keeping their Moldovan export licenses valid. If Chisinau were to revoke these permits, the Sheriff Empire would bankrupt overnight. This has created a bizarre geopolitical paradox where the pro-Russian leadership is privately negotiating with European diplomats to ensure stability, effectively holding the region hostage to protect their assets. They are slowly decoupling from Moscow because the Kremlin offers only war and isolation, whereas Europe offers the solvency needed to keep their monopoly alive. The hammer and sickle may still fly over the parliament building, but the decisions are being made based on the euro exchange rate, not Marxist-Leninist doctrine. The specter of the Russian army in Transnistria has been used for decades as a psychological weapon to intimidate Moldova and distract Ukraine, but in 2025, this force is little more than a paper tiger incapable of projecting power. Officially, the operational group of Russian forces OGRF consists of approximately 1,500 personnel tasked with guarding the peace and the ammunition depots. However, detailed intelligence assessments expose a force in terminal decline. Since Ukraine sealed its borders in 2022, Russia has been unable to rotate officers, supply fresh equipment, or even provide basic maintenance parts for the contingent. As a result, the vast majority of the soldiers currently wearing Russian uniforms are not actually Russian citizens deployed from Moscow. They are local Transnistrian resident taxi drivers, laborers, and unemployed youth who enlisted simply for a paycheck that is slightly higher than the local average. They hold Russian passports, but they have no combat experience, zero ideological commitment to the Kremlin, and absolutely no desire to die in a conflict against a modern military. The equipment they operate is equally decrepit. The armored personnel carriers APCs are rusting in their depots, suffering from dry rot on their tires and engine failures due to a lack of spare parts. If a conflict were to erupt, military analysts predict this force would collapse or surrender within hours. The only genuine threat they possess is the colossal Kobasna ammunition depot situated just 2 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. Housing an estimated 20,000 tons of Soviet-era munitions, it is one of the largest weapons caches in Eastern Europe. However, much of this ordnance is expired and chemically unstable. It is less of a strategic asset and more of a ticking environmental time bomb. A detonation there would rival the force of the Hiroshima bomb, causing a humanitarian disaster rather than a military victory. Meanwhile, the Moldovan National Army, long neglected, has received significant upgrades from Western partners, including French radar systems and German Piranha armored vehicles. The balance of power has shifted irreversibly. Tiraspol no longer poses an offensive threat to Odessa or Chisinau. Instead, the Russian garrison is essentially a group of hostages trapped in their own base, watching their equipment degrade while the world around them modernizes. The Kremlin's unsinkable aircraft carrier is stranded without fuel, crew, or a mission. We are now witnessing the final chapter of the Transnistrian conflict, a frozen war that is thawing rapidly under the heat of geopolitical necessity. With economic lifeline cut and the military deterrent exposed as a bluff, the status quo is no longer sustainable. The trajectory points toward one of 2 outcomes: a managed reintegration or a chaotic collapse. The managed scenario, preferred by Brussels and Chisinau, involves a soft landing where the region is slowly reabsorbed into the legal and economic framework of Moldova. This would likely follow the German model, where the European Union provides a massive reintegration fund to subsidize the transition, modernize the crumbling infrastructure, and pay the pensions of the elderly population who have been dependent on Russian handouts. In this scenario, the sheriff oligarchs would likely be granted amnesty and allowed to retain their legitimate business assets in exchange for dismantling the separatist security apparatus and accepting Moldovan sovereignty. It is a transactional peace, ugly but effective. The alternative is the hard collapse, where the energy crisis leads to a total breakdown of law and order in Tiraspol. If the lights go out and the factories close, a humanitarian crisis will force thousands of refugees to flee across the Dniester River, compelling the Moldovan government to intervene with international police assistance to restore order. For Vladimir Putin, either outcome is a humiliating strategic defeat. Losing Transnistria means losing his only foothold in the Balkans and the death of the Novorossiya dream. It signifies that the Russian world concept has failed not just militarily, but civilizationally. The people of the region, when given the choice between a dark, isolated Russian garrison and a European future, will ultimately choose the latter. The power shift mentioned in your video title is not just a slogan, it is a historical reality. The borders of Europe are being redrawn, and for the first time in 30 years, the red line is moving east, leaving Tiraspol on the western side of the divide. The business file on the separatist project is closing, proving that in the modern era, you cannot build a nation on smuggled cigarettes, free gas, and foreign bayonets. The siege is over and the fortress has fallen without a single shot being fired.